Hello everyone, this is Who Did You Boycott today? I'm going to pick up at where I left off on part one. Uh, the end was came to an end abruptly, so I'm going to try to pick up with a few closing words. Part two of MLK famous InJustice quote. And I wanted to be absolutely clear to any person that will have a chance to listen to this audio where I stand as far as perspective and what motivated me to make this audio. I am a 61-year-old person, and the good Lord has blessed me to live to reach 61 years old. I like to think that over those 61 years of my life, I have had a chance to learn a little bit about things. I don't claim to know it all. I don't claim to be right about everything. But I was blessed with a special mom, with brothers and sisters, in a community environment that I can honestly evaluate that helped shape me to be the person I am today. And as I stated on the previous audio, each one of us, each individual human being is shaped by their environment, by the persons in their environment as their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, relatives, friends, associates, your community as a whole, your interaction with different other persons, all play a major role in the impact it will have on you as an individual in shaping your perspective, your mindset, and how you process information that you hear, and how you feel about the information that you hear. And just in the past week or so, it has been very unsettling to listen to the different adults in different Twitter spaces. And because I've mainly been on Twitter, I have not had a chance to go around to different other platforms like Clubhouse, Fanbase, YouTube. But I have spent a little time on YouTube listening to a couple of persons that I follow on YouTube to try to get a different perspective than the one on Twitter. And as I started to say, as far as MLK famous InJustice quote, as I listen to adults, I wonder if they have read MLK quote. Do they know about it? Have they ever heard of it? I constantly ask myself, do each of us as individual realize that so much of our perspective and our mindset has been shaped by the environment, and the persons in that environment has had a major impact on our perspectives. But you wouldn't know that to a certain extent when you pop into different Twitter spaces and folks are coming off the microphone, and then a lot of times they're very upset, they're very angry, they're very biased, they're very racist, they're very evil in the choice of words that they choose to express their comments. And it's so evident that it's self-serving, it's self-interest. It's just so many variables at play. But as human beings, we choose not to step back and try to do critical evaluation of our personal bias. Why is that? What is hindering our personal choice to sit down when we are by ourselves? Nobody else have to know about it, and just do critical evaluation of our personal perspectives and just be frankly honest with yourself. If you don't think you have the ability to take part in conversations with other persons and be frankly honest, maybe you have to get by yourself to be able to reach that root of honesty. It is very, very apparent of the self-interest, and including myself. I am not left out of this equation by no means. As I speak to you in this audio, I know fully aware and fully conscious that my individual self, I am speaking to my individual self as I make this audio. But I think the one important thing to be mindful of, those persons who are able to admit they have personal bias is further along to reaching honesty than those who deny that their personal bias shape a good percent of their perspective and mindset. I would choose a person who, honestly, I'm not saying you do it fakely, because that's not gonna work. If you're doing it, if you're claiming that you're trying to be unbiased and you know you're being fake and lying, more times than not, a person can tell. But there are persons who do try their absolute best to separate a personal bias and give an honest, decent, and fair perspective. There are many of us that make that conscious effort to give a unbiased perspective by making an effort to operate from a start point of humanity, decency, and fairness, and whatever other variables or labels that you want to use. But unless you have gotten to a place where you believe your own lies, you believe your own, you're so wrapped into your own self-interest that you don't have the ability to separate and try to reach a honest, fair, and balanced perspective, then there's no hope for you. You're too far gone. There's probably no hope of you having the ability to make that self-correction. You're beyond reachable to make self-correction. But those of us who are making that conscious effort, who have made that conscious effort from the time they were old enough to start trying to apply critical thinking, and those persons of us who started at a very young age to stand on truth and honesty, it has become a habit, a built-in habit of your personal existence. So you unconsciously and consciously operate from that perspective. And since you have built that habit within yourself, you are most times doing your absolute best to operate from a honest and decency and fair perspective. But if that has not been something that you start developing at a young age, or at some later point in your life that you made a firm commitment to stand on, then you may not know what that consists of, what that looked like, what that sound like. But for certain, if you have not had that thoughtful consciousness conversation with yourself, and you have not been able to identify that about your personality at some point during your life, whether you was 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, somewhere along the way, as you were growing up and being shaped by your environment and the persons in your environment, you should be able to go back somewhere in your memory and pinpoint when you started making a decision, your personal decision to stand on truth and honesty. Every person should be able to pinpoint that. I can certainly remember personally asking my mother a question one day. I said, "Mom, how do you, how did I word it? Let me see." I asked her a question about consciousness and honesty. That's clear as my memory is. That I remember coming home one day, or just being around the house one day, and the question came out of my mouth because I was being bothered by my conscience, and I wanted my mother to help me to understand why, I would be around other persons, and I know I could tell when they was telling a lie, but it didn't seem to bother them. But whenever I thought about trying to, not tell the truth, it bothered me. It just weighed on my mind. And I asked my mother one day about that. I wanted her to help me to understand it. And she broke it down that, your conscience can be your guide. Your conscience can be your guide and help you to stand on truth and honesty. And I think about that. I remember having that conversation with my mother. I can't remember all of the specific details, but as sure as my name is what it is on my birth certificate, and with every breath that I have taken, I had that conversation with my mother. Yes, I did. I know I did, and my Heavenly Father and my mother know I did. And she really helped to put me on the right path of building a habit of wanting to stand on truth and honesty. That shaped me from that day forward. It helped to shape me and help me to want to stand on honesty and truth and develop that character trait within myself. I'm not going to sit here and claim that it has been an easy road. No, I can't sit up here and claim that I have told the absolute truth about everything, but I can honestly say that I have told the truth about pretty much everything that I can remember. About I'm close right at 99%, I would say. It's a small 1% that I can say that there have been times when I would not want to say certain things not to hurt person's feelings, so I may not tell them the frankly truth because I was thinking I was trying to spare their feelings. When I was in relationships with gentlemen, with other males, that I didn't tell the up and up truth about certain things at certain times during the relationship, but that was very few times. I think the only time that I did not hold myself to the standard of standing on truth and honesty was very few times, very, very few times, whenever they happen. But I'm being completely honest, and I can admit to that. And they were very, very few times. But if I'm being an honest person, I have to admit to all of it. I can't just try to leave out what parts that I want to leave out to try to paint myself in a rosy light. I am a flawed human being just like the next person. But the one difference that I can identify with for myself is that I've held myself to a high standard. I have did self-evaluation when I have fallen short. I have been able to point that out to myself and not lie to myself and say, no, you were completely honest. When I have not been completely honest, I'm able to admit that to myself. And I'm able to admit it to certain persons too, who I can open up to. But I want it to be clear that standing on truth and honesty is not a easy road to travel. And there are going to be times when you fall short of that. But if you're making every conscious effort to be on that road and to stay on that road, more times than not, you're gonna reach that bar. You're gonna reach that bar more times than you're gonna miss it. And that's why I can say with a clear conscience that that's the bar that I set for myself at a very young age with the help of my mother. Yes, I did, with the help of my brothers and sisters too. Because I had a sister that was very dishonest. And as I grew up with her, I knew I didn't want to be that way. I didn't want that to be a part of my personality. So I made every effort not to allow it to be a part of my personality, because I had a chance to witness that character trait in my older sister. So I'm going to move right along here and get back to closing out this second part, because it's very important to understand that injustice that MLK, Martin Luther King, spoke of has an impact on each of us directly and indirectly every single day of our life. Every single day of our life. And each one of us play a part, have a responsibility and an obligation to decide and to determine whether the environment and the society and the world that we live in will operate from a perspective of justice, or will that environment or society or the world as a whole operate from an injustice perspective. Each one of us play a part. Each one of us who is old enough to understand what part that we contribute to living in a society that enforces justice or allows injustice. It's not a hard thing. This is not a difficult question for those of us who are old enough to at least be able to understand a little bit about a world that we live in and day out. Yes, it's probably a little bit more harder for those who are younger, who may be 18, 19, 20 years old and on up, a little further in age. But as you get older, you should be able to start understanding the world that you live in and what part you play in it. You are not a spectator. Each one of us are a participant. That's what we're doing every single day of our life. We are being a participant in the society and the world that we live in. But, of course, far too often, persons choose to be spectators. They just sit on the sideline or stand off to the side or stay silent and just be a spectator. Then somewhere along the way, they realize that they have been impacted either negative or positive by not being a participant in a society that they live in day to day. Just some day comes along and you realize, oh my Lord, I am being impacted negatively by something that folks made a decision about and I didn't get any input in it. That's how I feel about injustice and justice. And that's how I feel about the way I have tried to interpret MLK famous quote, "Injustice." So my thought process is very simple. Those of us who are upset and sad and feeling pain for the loss of life of another human being, whether that human being lives in Palestine or Israel or America or Germany or Canada or Europe or the continent or Jamaica or Haiti or the Bahamas. If we as a human being care about life, if we really, really care about human life, then we should say that we care about human life of a person who lives in America, who lives in Canada, who live in Africa, who live in Jamaica, who live in Europe, who live in Germany, who live in, what's another one? Japan, all over the world. If we really, really care about human life and human justice, then it should not be a selective thought process. It should not be a selective caring. It should not be a selective pain. It should be a humanity caring. One human being to another human being. If you're not able to see other human life in that way, then you may just be operating from a selfish standpoint, a self-interest standpoint. I'm not here to determine what perspective you may be operating from. I can simply speak from the perspective that myself as an individual is operating from. And I'm quite clear, very, very clear, what perspective I personally am operating from. That's one of the things that my mother made clear to me to help me to understand. And I have done my absolute best to rely on that understanding that my mother gave me. It has been my measuring guide as I went into the real world and grew into an adult. So folks are just going to have to make a hard decision. They are going to have to make a hard decision. They can continue to voice these self-interest, self-serving perspectives, and as long as they continue to do that, nothing's going to change. You have every right to continue to think and speak from a self-serving, self-interest perspective. You have every right to decide to do that. But just know that each time that you choose to continue it, then you relinquish your right to cry about the pain and suffering and death that you are upset about, because you made a personal choice that you are going to operate from a self-serving, self-interest perspective. So you forfeit your right to speak about pain, suffering, and death, because you lack the ability to come to a perspective that is humanity, decency, and fairness. You have to remove yourself from the conversation, because your perspective can only cause additional harm. That's all it can do. It will not be able to contribute in a productive way. And since folks are really upset and very, very upset with the war that's going on in Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel, and all around the world, But I wonder how persons stopped in their tracks and took the time, excuse me, and taking the time to do self-evaluation. Self-evaluation, and ask themselves, what part do I play? What responsibility do I have as an individual in what happens in the world that I live in day to day? What part is my responsibility? What part is my personal responsibility? Well, I have taken the time to ask myself that question. I constantly do. And my responsibility as an individual is to do my absolute best to separate my personal bias and my personal self-interest and try to look at something in the most objective perspective that I can and be as fair and balanced as humanly possible. If I do not have the ability to do that, then I need to remove myself and not give my perspective because I don't have the ability to remove my personal self-interest and self-serving perspective. Now, as human beings, we clearly know, if we're being honest, that we each are speaking from our personal perspectives. We can't avoid that. We cannot avoid speaking from our own personal perspectives. And each one of us will have different perspectives depending on the environment, the persons that have shaped our perspectives. And since if we're willing to be honest about that, I think we can still get to a consensus on what is humanly fair and balanced. Even as human beings, we cannot remove our personal perspectives, our personal bias completely, but we still have the ability to separate it as much as humanly possible, to come to a consensus based on humanity, decency, and fairness. We can write those three things down and just be truthful with ourselves. And if we're being truthful with ourselves about those three things, I think we're going to reach that bar. We're going to come very close to reaching that bar. And then that's going to make it possible for each of us to live in a more happier, safer world. But unless we're willing to fight for that and stand on that every single day of our life, then things are going to spin out of control. Then we're going to witness injustice. We are going to constantly witness injustice that includes pain, suffering, and death. What is difficult to understand about that? Adults. I'm not speaking to the young teens and babies and those that don't have the ability to evaluate things in an objective way. I'm only trying to speak to those persons who have the ability to evaluate questions in an objective way. Objective, fair, and balanced objective perspective. If you know yourself not to be that person, then do the right thing and don't include yourself in the conversation. Just don't do that, because you are going to cause more harm than good. So, in closing, MLK, famous quote, "Injustice," clearly is what we are witnessing with the war between Palestine and Israel. But as we come to that understanding, let us be clear. MLK was speaking to the injustice that Negroes were being subject to. MLK was clearly living in America. MLK, famous quote, "Injustice," was speaking to the pain and suffering and death of his people, Negroes. Nobody can deny that. Don't even bother to try. But over the decades and decades and decades, persons have chosen to use that quote for a self-serving argument. But that doesn't help anything. It's the only thing it does is to show your self-serving perspective and how it will continue to inflict harm and pain. But I am clear that MLK, famous quote, "Injustice," was clearly trying to say to the world that America is inflicting injustice onto every Negro slave, every Negro descendant, and as long as the rest of the world choose to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to that injustice, then it would threaten justice around the world. And that's exactly what we can say that we have bear witness to, depending on how long you've been living on this earth. Each of us know that we cannot deny that factual truth. Just read the quote for yourself. If you have the ability to be honest and truthful, it's no way humanly possible for you to read MLK's quote and not interpret it and comprehend it to mean that he was speaking to the injustice that Negroes were experiencing in America. And he did his absolute best to warn the rest of the world that if the rest of the world turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to Negroes' suffering, that it would spread around the world. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Can anyone deny that with a straight face and be standing on truth and honesty? No, you can't. So, for all you folks who want Negroes to take a side in the war between Palestine and Israel, save your time and save your breath. Save your time and save your breath. And all you persons who are running before the microphone like the politicians and BLM global organization and all these TV news stations and radios and social media platform who's trying to shape a narrative that Negroes are standing with Palestine or Negroes feel this way. You don't know that. You're making assumptions. Unless you have the ability to take a fair consensus, get a fair consensus of a good percent of folks, you are just standing before a microphone or you're writing, putting something in writing. That's a lie. Just like the NAACP. The NAACP cannot step before a microphone and take the liberty and the right to speak for millions of persons, but they choose to do that anytime they feel like it, and they are liars. And any person who is doing it is a liar. like the BLM global organization, which is separate from the grassroots BLM organizations who represent their local area, not to confuse the two. But folks need to stop that sickness of thinking they have the right and the ability to speak for millions of persons. Now the NAACP, take them for example, they know how many members they have. They can say this percent of our members feel this way, this percent of our members feel that way. And they can go before a microphone and break it down in that way to be standing on honesty and truth. But to do a paintbrush that every member of the NAACP stands on what is coming out of a certain person's mouth, unless they can show you some data, present some data, post some data that breaks down the number of members in their organization and what's that breakdown results showed. They have to be questioned as to whether or not they are lying. Unless you can show me some factual data that 5,000 members in the NAACP said they gladly stand with Palestine or gladly stand with Israel, then you are just standing before a microphone lying. You're lying. And those who are listening need to start asking that critical question. Why is this individual person lying to me? Because if you care about your well-being, the person who is listening, and I know when I listen to other people talk, I care about my well-being. I care about my financial security. I care about my safety. I care about my self-respect. So any given time when I'm listening to another person, I'm asking myself a simple question. Is what they are saying out their mouth going to affect my well-being? Is it going to affect my financial security? Is it going to affect my safety? Is it going to affect my self-respect? I am constantly doing that with every person that I listen to. Every person. I don't care who you are. I'm asking myself those critical questions because I care about my personal well-being. I care about the well-being of my daughter, my family members, my community. I care about my financial security, my personal safety, and my self-respect. So I don't sit and listen to anyone saying whatever they choose to say out their mouth without asking critical questions before I can reach a conclusion of whether or not I'm going to believe them. More times than not, I'm not going to believe them unless I can find or do research that help me to trust what I heard come out of their mouth. So it will serve each of us as individual human beings to just be honest and truthful. If we choose not to do that, then just know that you are causing harm. You may not be shooting bullets or using a weapon, but you're still causing harm to another human being. You're doing that directly or indirectly. And you will have to be judged for that one day. Each one of us will have to be judged for that. So just think long and hard about what you say out your mouth. Because if you're saying things out your mouth that's misleading, that's untruthful, dishonest, or false narratives, or outright lies, then you're gonna be judged for that one day. You're gonna be punished. Each one of us are going to be judged and punished for what we say and do, whatever length of time that we are here. We don't get to escape that. We may tell ourselves that we do, but it's not truthful. Each one of us are going to be judged by the words and our actions for the length of time that we lived. So if you don't care about the consequences, keep right on lying. Keep lying to yourself and keep lying to everyone that hear you. But in closing, MLK, Martin Luther King, certainly was speaking to the injustice that Negroes were suffering. And no one can deny that. So if the rest of the world do not want to see history repeat itself, they will use their voice, their time, and their connections to send a message to America to end the injustice that they have subjected Negroes to for over 400 years. So every human being that will hear this recording, you have a choice to make. You can decide to use your voice and your time and your personal connections to send your personal message to America that you are not going to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to Negroes suffering, because as long as Negroes suffering is allowed to continue, there's no hope for the rest of the world. There's no hope for the rest of the world to receive justice. I wonder how the world would have turned out if persons would have really, really listened to MLK quote. I wonder. I asked myself that question at 61. What would have my life been like if the world that I was birthed into had really, really paid attention to that quote? How would life have been for me, since I was just getting ready to turn 1 year old at the time of MLK writing this famous quote? How would life have been for me if the world that I was birthed into had really taken it seriously, the words that MLK spoke? I won't probably never get the answer to that question, and I will constantly ask myself that question over and over until I die. So I will close with saying that America, I'm not talking to the rest of the folks who have made it quite clear that they're not concerned or don't care about Negro suffering. My final words is to America. Write the reparations check, America. Pay the debt that you owe. Stop sending Negro tax dollars around the world. Re-implement Special Field Order 15 and end the injustice that you have inflicted on Negroes for over 400 years. That's my final word. America, once again, end the injustice that you have inflicted on Negroes for over 400 years. Take MLK's famous quote to heart. Really, really interpret it and really, really comprehend MLK's InJustice quote and do the right thing. Do the decent, humane, fair decision to end the injustice that America has decided to inflict on Negroes for over 400 years. And until America make a decision to end that injustice, America will continue to be punished. America and anyone that is helping America will continue to be punished and will receive judgment someday. So the choice is each and every person. Each and every person can make that personal decision every second of the day. So look up the MLK InJustice famous quote on Google search engine and really, really listen to the words and really, really comprehend and interpret what he was doing his best to convey. And if you are not able to make self-correction, just remove yourself from the conversation because you don't have the ability to operate from a humanity and decency and fair perspective. You do not have those abilities, those qualities. So just simply remove yourself from these public conversations because you are doing more harm than good. Thank you, folks. Take care. Keep safe. Be alert for Negroes. Be alert to your environment. Be alert to the people in your environment because there are many, many persons walking around with the intentions to cause bodily harm and death and murder to innocent persons. So Negroes, have this conversation with your family members and your community, and let us do our absolute best to look out for each other. Take care, and thank you for taking the time to listen.